Intro animation. Rendered graphic of a glowing high-rise collapsing under intense geotechnical pressure. Text on screen flapping roughly. The silent sinking. Fast-paced. Thumping electronic industrial beat beginner. VO. Right now, beneath the neon skylines of China's Tier 1 megacities, a multi-billion-dollar architectural crisis is quietly unfolding in the dark. Across the mainland, there are ultra-luxury skyscrapers that are dropping straight into the mud, glass mega-towers that are leaning out of plumb, and landmark residential blocks doing both at the exact same time. Some of these structures are iconic crown jewels of local, municipal engineering. Others are hyper-exclusive waterfront developments where the cheapest raw space studio unit cost more than an average Chinese factory engineer or public servant will earn in 3 entire lifetimes. And in nearly every single instance, the wealthy tech executives and real estate investors who purchased these sky mansions found out about the fatal structural compromises the exact same way, not from a transparent report by the Municipal Construction Commission. Not from the billionaire developers who signed off on the builds. They found out from desperate investor lawsuits, leaked satellite radar studies, or structural cracks in the basement columns that grew too massive for building management to hide. Graphic on screen. Red map of mainland China, pinpointing Shanghai, Shenzhen, Tianjin, and the South China coastline. Trek-it cross Shanghai'S flashing over each city. In this comprehensive investigative file, we are putting 5 of these engineering nightmares side by side. 5 Chinese megastructures across 5 distinct geographical zones, all actively sinking or tilting right now. And by the time the dust settles on this report, I am going to reveal the single catastrophic financial decision that links almost every single one of them. Because once your eyes are open to this foundation vulnerability, you will never look at a modern skyline the same way again. It is the exact same shortcut made over and over by competing consortiums who all gambled on the exact same fatal assumption, that the soft ground would hold the weight of their ambition. This is construction file number 5. The dossier on the 5 leaning towers of China is officially open. Sung heavy metal hydraulic door slam graphic on screen. Case file 1. The Baoshan Pinnacle. Shanghai'S. The first entry takes us to the soft, alluvial edge of Shanghai. If you have been tracking our structural updates, you already know about the infamous Baoshan Pinnacle. Completed in 2009, this ultra-luxury tower rises a staggering 196 meters into the coastal sky, spanning 58 stories of reinforced concrete and premium triple-glazed glass. Upon completion, it was hailed as the absolute pinnacle of luxury living in the district. A monument of pure wealth where standard units traded for tens of millions of yuan, and the sprawling triplex penthouse cleared a jaw-dropping 90 million CNY dagai 13 million USD. It was marketed as an unshakable fortress, but beneath the polished granite lobby lay a ticking engineering time bomb, because the developers chose to build this massive, top-heavy concrete monolith on a friction pile foundation that completely failed to reach the solid bedrock beneath the Yangtze River Delta. Instead, the building's immense weight was supported entirely by piles friction-locked into the shifting, waterlogged, soft silt layers near the edge of the East China Sea. Music drops out. Low sub-bass drone on. The original soil mechanics and engineering projections predicted a minor, highly manageable 100 to 150 millimeters of uniform settlement over the tower's entire century-long lifetime. That is what the buyers were promised. That is what the local housing bureau stamped for approval. But the earth didn't care about the blueprint. By the time the high-net-worth residents were quietly alerted to the structural anomaly, in 2016, the Baoshan Pinnacle hadn't just settled. It had plummeted. The tower had sunk a brutal 406 millimeters into the silt and was tilting visibly toward the northwest. By 2023, the differential settlement had worsened exponentially, throwing the tower out of plumb by an incredible 736 millimeters at its upper parapet. The structural stress was immense. Elevators began grinding against their shafts. Water lines under the foundation cracked like toothpicks. A massive emergency stabilization program was hastily launched in late 2023. A complex, 9-figure engineering rescue operation that required drilling deep underpinning piles, through the basement floor all the way down to real bedrock to arrest the catastrophic descent. The emergency fix managed to halt the active sinking, but the damage was already permanently baked into the concrete spine. Today, the Baoshan pinnacle remains frozen in place, leaning over 710 millimeters out of alignment. The promised structural recovery and straightening routine yielded less than a quarter of what the hired consultants guaranteed to the owners. It stands today as the ultimate template for every disaster that follows in this file. An insanely heavy building, built on saturated, unforgiving soil, relying on a foundation that never touched solid rock. Shanghai'S digital clock ticking, interrupted by a sharp graphic whoosh, graphic on screen. Case File 2, the Shanghai's Supreme Tower Shenzhen. Narrator VO. Our second file takes us thousands of kilometers south to the hyper-dense, lightning-fast tech metropolis of Shenzhen. Here, the engineering failure manifests not as a sinking disaster, but as a terrifying display of extreme slenderness and material compromise. Welcome to the Shanghai's Supreme Tower. When this glittering monument of architectural hubris topped out in 2014, it was celebrated as one of the slimmest, tallest residential structures on the southern coastline. Rises an astonishing 425 meters into the subtropical sky, a monolithic obelisk of pristine white architectural concrete. This wasn't just a building. It was a vertical country club for the nation's tech elite. The crown jewel of the development, a multi-level sky mansion penthouse, shattered local real estate records when it was snapped up by a billionaire logistics tycoon for astronomical 610 million yuan, 87.7 million USD. But the structural arithmetic of the Shanghai's Supreme Tower harbored a fundamental vulnerability. The tower's aspect ratio, its height to width proportion, is a razor-thin 15:1. To put that in perspective, engineering guidelines classify anything over 10:1 as highly sensitive to dynamic lateral loads. When typhoon-strength winds roar off the South China Sea, the Shanghai's Supreme Tower doesn't just resist the force. It sways like a bamboo reed, moving through a dramatic, stomach-churning lateral oscillation sweep that routinely leaves residents on the upper floors battling motion sickness inside their multi-million yuan living rooms. Graphic on green. 3D reconstruction of a vernival skyscraper swaying in typhoon winds. Red flashing lines highlight the structural spine, but the true failure of the Shanghai's Supreme Tower was hidden behind its immaculate white facade. According to a massive, unprecedented 1.15 billion yuan lawsuit filed by the furious homeowners committee against the master developer, the core of this disaster traces back to a single aesthetic choice that defied the building's own engineering consult. The technical specifications drawn up by the structural engineers strictly demanded the application of a high-grade, flexible elastomeric membrane coating across the entire exterior. This paint is engineered to stretch and seal concrete under immense wind stress, preventing water from breaching the microscopic hairline fractures that naturally open as a skyscraper sways. However, the lead developer, a billionaire tycoon known for his obsessive attention to minimalist architectural design, loathed the matte finish of the elastomeric paint. He believed it would ruin the building's brilliant, hyper-reflective white luster. Against the direct warnings of the material engineering team, he ordered the entire 425-meter concrete facade to be sealed with a proprietary, clear silicone coating instead, the exact same aesthetic waterproofing material used on his personal luxury yacht fleet. The real-world consequences of that were catastrophic. Shanghai'S, low underwater rumble, cracking subbass, unlike an elastomeric membrane. The rigid silicone coating lacked the elasticity to survive the constant, violent swaying of a 15:1 slenderness ratio. Under the relentless assault of summer typhoons and intense subtropical downpours, the silicone seal shattered across thousands of microscopic stress points. Driven by extreme wind pressures at 300 meters in the air, millions of liters of highly humid, brackish rainwater migrated directly into the structural concrete core. The chronological deterioration was terrifyingly rapid. September 2017, routine maintenance drones capture images of massive, milky efflorescent stains spreading across the white concrete. March 2019, Internal moisture sensors deep within the building's structural spine flash critical alerts. Structural engineers discover water tracking along the main elevator shafts. June 2020, Day 1. A comprehensive ultrasonic inspection reveals a devastating 250-millimeter structural crack cutting directly into the building's primary concrete shear core. November 2023. Core samples drilled from the main structural columns confirm that the high-tensile steel rebar encased in the concrete has begun to extensively corrode, losing a critical percentage of its structural cross-section due to chronic rust expansion. Graphic on screen. Chronology timeline whizzing by with red X marks over the dating points. This was a total systemic compromise. The very bones of the tallest residential tower in the region were rusting from the inside out, all because an executive decision was made to prioritize pristine cosmetic appearance over basic structural physics. The mechanics of the failure are entirely different from the mud-sinking disaster in Shanghai. But the psychological root cause is identical. A conscious choice by human developers to overwrite the cold, unyielding mathematical warnings of the engineering class to preserve immediate profits and aesthetic vanity. Songq, a sudden urban siren blip fast transitioning into a gritty hip-hop beat. Graphic on screen. Case File 3. The Guangzhou waterfront residence. Guangzhou narrator. Our third file brings us straight into the heart of the Pearl River Delta, to the bustling, river-cut terrain of Guangzhou. Here, along a prime hyper-expensive waterfront bend, sits the Guangzhou Waterfront Residences, a project marketed globally under the glittering name No. 1 Seaport. It stands 204 meters tall, an imposing 60-story glass and steel luxury condominium tower situated barely 2 blocks from the edge of the rushing Pearl River. But if you talk to the local structural inspectors, or the crane operators who watched it rise, they don't call it by its marketing name. They call it the Leaning Tower of the Delta. Some, in hushed whispers across architectural forums, call it the Waterfront Banana. Because this building isn't just tilting out of plumb, it is physically curving. Graphic on screen. Diagram of a ski scraper with an exaggerated curve. A plumb line drops from the roof, landing meters away from the base, highlighting the structural bend in red. How does a 200-meter luxury tower end up shaped like a piece of fruit? The answer is buried deep in the mud of the foundation bidding process. According to a massive multi-party lawsuit filed by the main engineering contractor against the Parent Development Consortium, the soil directly beneath this Pearl River site consists of treacherous, shifting riverbed alluvial silt underlaid by unstable, highly fractured shale. Standard engineering protocol for a building of this immense mass in Guangzhou dictates driving heavy, steel-reinforced concrete board piles down through the mud until they strike solid, unyielding granite bedrock. A depth of nearly 80 meters on this specific plot, but striking bedrock is incredibly slow, and it is brutally expensive. The developer looked at the geotechnical budget and balked, eager to slash overhead and shave 4 months off the construction cycle to meet their pre-sale revenue targets. The executive board made a fateful executive pivot. They bypassed the bedrock requirement entirely. Instead, they opted for a much cheaper soil improvement matrix foundation, essentially injecting chemical grout into the mud and sitting the massive tower on a shallower, floating concrete raft. The developer saved an estimated 42 million yuan, $6 million US, up front. It seemed like a financial masterstroke, until the tower reached its 25th floor. Under the increasing, crushing weight of the rising concrete structure, the compromised soil matrix on the north side of the plot gave way. The building began to heel over, tilting a sharp 76 millimeters to the north during active construction. Music drops into a disquieting, slow metronomic clang. What happened next defies belief, yet it highlights the sheer panic behind the scenes. Rather than halting construction, pulling down the concrete, and driving piles to bedrock, the project management team tried to cheat the lean. They ordered the contractors to continue building upward, but instructed them to angle the upper floors slightly in the opposite direction to counteract the tilt. The result was a structural monstrosity. The building didn't straighten out. It warped. It became a tower with a permanent structural spine curvature. When the local municipal construction commission, caught wind of the severe structural deviation. They pulled the plug. Construction ground to a screeching halt. The expensive glass curtain wall was partially ripped off to shed dead weight, and for years, this hollow, half-finished, twisted concrete skeleton has loomed over the Guangzhou waterfront. Structural engineers estimate that any viable engineering solution to permanently stabilize and plumb the waterfront banana will cost well into 9 figures. Well over 700 million yuan, dog 100 million USD. That is a financial death sentence for a building whose entire projected sellout value was capped at 1.9 billion yuan. Graphic on screen. Spillet screen showing the 3 towers, Shanghai, Shenzhen, Guangzhou. Red text flashing over them. Asian facial. Look at the terrifying pattern forming right before your eyes. 3 distinct mega structures. 3 economic powerhouses. Shanghai, Shenzhen, Guangzhou. 3 engineering teams that chose to cut corners, ignore geotechnical reality, or skip the bedrock entirely just to preserve immediate profit margins or save face. But if you think this is just an isolated issue restricted to a few vanity projects in the South, you are dead wrong. Because our 4th entry completely shatters the scale of this investigation. It proves that the soil crisis isn't a collection of individual developer blunders. It is a systemic, subterranean breakdown that is quietly jeopardizing entire coastal skylines. If you want to track these infrastructure files as we unpack them, hit that subscribe button right now. The construction files are expanding, and you cannot afford to miss what comes next. Because we are about to pull back the curtain on a hidden crisis involving dozens of skyscrapers at once. Shanghai'S low freak, sat-to-light, pinging effect in a nebel room, graphic on screen. Case file AS4, the intensive geospatial data, sat-to-light deep dive, surfside scale coincidences on the continental mad narrator, VOIF up until this point. Our investigation has focused on individual monuments of architectural failure, isolated corporate errors on a singular plot of land. But here is where the file expands from a few compromised towers to a widespread, structural crisis of unprecedented scale. The 4th entry on our list isn't one building. It is 35 high-rise complexes simultaneously losing their footing along a single stretch of vulnerable coastline. Graphic on screen, map of the booming southern, reclaimed shorelines and delta zones of South China. Radar heat maps overlaying the coastlines, showing large swaths of recent high-rise, districts glowing in angry amber and crimson. Let's look directly at the hard data. In late 2024, a team of top-tier geospatial scientists and remote sensing experts published an exhaustive, peer-reviewed satellite radar study that sent absolute shockwaves through the regional construction industry. Utilizing highly precise interferometric synthetic aperture radar data, known as INSAR, collected continuously across an 8-year observation window. They measured the absolute vertical ground displacement of modern architectural developments along a major coastal development corridor. What the satellites uncovered was a hidden, geotechnical nightmare. Across a high-density zone dominated by recent real estate expansion, 35 separate luxury high-rise towers, premium hotels, and mixed-use commercial blocks were found to be actively sinking into the earth. The satellite sensors clocked vertical subsidence rates ranging from 20 millimeters to an alarming 78 millimeters of total downward settlement. And here is the precise detail that made this engineering study an overnight sensation across internal industry boards. Over half of those actively sinking towers were less than 10 years old. These weren't crumbling, neglected relics built during the early post-reform era. These were sleek, ultra-modern glass palaces, architectural showpieces designed by elite international firms, and marketed as the absolute vanguard of modern civil engineering. Yet, under the immense weight of their own concrete mass, they were quietly pushing down into the soft sand-layered limestone matrices and saturated alluvial substrata that form the foundation of these vulnerable coastal margins. Shanghai'S, repeated mechanical metrom under narration. The lead geophysicists were highly precise about the mechanics of this regional failure. The rapid subsidence was being driven by an inescapable combination of factors: load-induced compression, the literal crushing weight of high-density concrete blocks compressing the porous, water-saturated sand layers trapped inside the coastal limestone base. Construction-induced fluid dynamics. Violent, structural harmonic vibrations emanating from relentless nearby subway tunneling and deep foundation driving on adjacent plots, which destabilize the surrounding soil columns. Tidal, groundwater migration, the ceaseless, rhythmic push and pull of maritime tides, washing through the subterranean porous rock, flushing out underlying fine sand grains and leaving invisible hollow microvoids directly beneath the massive foundation rafts. The scientists explicitly noted that this specific study did not predict imminent structural collapses, nor did it directly mirror past fatal failures caused by long-term structural neglect. But the reason this massive dataset belongs in Oz file is the chilling warning issued by a senior inspector with a regional civil engineering safety board upon analyzing the satellite maps. He pointed out that a significant number of these 35 documented towers had completely finished their initial structural settlement phases years before the satellite observation window even began. In his exact words, according to conventional soil mechanics, all primary consolidation and structural settlement that was ever going to occur should have already concluded. These high-rises should have achieved total equilibrium with the ground. They should not be exhibiting a single millimeter of additional downward movement. And yet, the satellites do not lie. They captured dozens of multi-thousand-ton towers, continually shifting, sinking, and twisting, long after they were engineered to stand completely still. To understand what this looks like for the actual people trapped inside this multi-billion yuan real estate trap, we have to look past the macro data and step inside the crumbling walls of these luxury sky mansions. Statson Q, dramatic sound drop, sound of cracking glass and dripping water. Let's talk about the human cost. Let's look at the actual luxury apartments where wealthy families invested their life savings, only to watch their concrete sanctuaries turn into a slow-motion disaster movie. Graphic on screen. Arc-full reconstruction overlay. The Emerald Bay Harbor Towers. Consider the case of the Emerald Bay Harbor Towers, a 3-tower luxury high-rise development sitting on premium reclaimed land along a booming southern delta coastline. Units here were the ultimate status symbol. We are talking about custom-designed duplex apartments with private infinity pools jutting out over the water. Purchased by tech entrepreneurs and real estate tycoons like Mr. Li Xiaodong, a prominent tech entrepreneur, Mr. Li spent over 45 million yuan on a sprawling 400-square-meter sub-penthouse on the 42nd floor, expecting a generational asset. Instead, he bought a front-row seat to a structural nightmare. It started subtly in the winter of 2022. Mr. Li began noticing that the custom-imported Italian marble floor tiles in his master bathroom were hairlining, cracking down the center in a perfectly straight line. Then came the sounds. In the dead of night, when the coastal winds died down, the entire apartment would echo with loud, metallic pops and deep, structural groans radiating from the central concrete utility core. Within 6 months, the movement became undeniable. Doors to the bedrooms began sticking in their frames, refusing to close unless shaved down by carpenters. The floor had developed a perceptible, stomach-churning slope. A marble fountain in the central lobby began spilling water unevenly, pouring over the southern lip, while the northern edge ran completely dry. Graphic on screen, real casualty dots evacuation footage schematics. Simulated architectural cross-sections, experiencing Severi, subsidence stress. The breaking point arrived in May 2024. Security guards patrolling the basement parking levels, 4 stories beneath the water table, heard a sound like a small explosion. One of the primary load-bearing columns supporting Tower B had sheared its outer concrete casing under intense differential settlement pressure. A massive 3-meter vertical fissure opened up across the main retaining wall, allowing hundreds of thousands of liters of highly pressurized, muddy coastal groundwater to violently breach the basement level. The scene was pure chaos. Car alarms screamed as brackish water flooded the lower parking decks, submerging multi-million yuan sports cars in a matter of hours. The local fire rescue and Municipal Emergency Management Bureau raced to the site, deploying high-output industrial pumps in a desperate bid to manage the rising inundation. The emergency inspectors didn't hesitate. Recognizing that Tower B was actively tilting away from Tower A at a catastrophic rate of 4 millimeters per week, they issued an immediate unconditional occupancy ban. Over 400 ultra-wealthy families were abruptly ordered to evacuate. They were given less than 2 hours to pack whatever belongings they could fit into suitcases, before their luxury homes were permanently sealed off with yellow structural hazard tape. Today, the Emerald Bay Harbor Towers stand completely dark, a haunting, vacant cluster of luxury glass ghosts. The economic fallout is staggering. Property values within the complex have plummeted to absolute zero. Insurance consortiums have completely denied the developers' liability claims, citing gross negligence in the early geotechnical site assessments. Over 3.2 billion yuan in elite real estate assets vanished practically overnight, leaving buyers, like Mr. Lee, holding worthless pieces of paper for apartments they are legally barred from ever stepping into again. Shanghai'S, low heartbeat thump-ons every 2. The debris from these failures isn't just concrete rubble in the basement. It is the absolute destruction of financial security for thousands of families who trusted that the structural integrity of a building was guaranteed by the sheer volume of money they paid for it. If you have followed this investigation this far into the depths of the file, you already know the kind of channel this is. You know we don't look away from the hard numbers, and we don't stop digging until we find the root cause. The only way an independent investigation of this magnitude keeps pushing forward is through the direct support of viewers like you who decide to subscribe and stand with us. If you haven't joined the network yet, hit that subscribe button right now. The fifth and final file is about to bring this entire systemic crisis home. Shanghai'S low, ominous industrial wine chime effects blending into the main track graphic on screen. Case File 5. The Grand Unified Court Cut. The Death of Geotechnical Patrons. Narrator. The fifth and final entry brings our entire investigation to its sharpest, most undeniable conclusion. Because this is the phase of the dossier that proves the crisis is not limited to luxury residential towers, and it isn't always just about failing to reach the bedrock. It reveals a deep-seated systemic vulnerability built directly into the modern philosophy of rapid urban expansion. Graphic on screen. Time-lapse radar graphic of eastern waterfronts growing exponentially over 3 decades. The landmass extends into the ocean, transitioning from bright green to an angry red industrial grid. Consider the immense waterfront districts of China's grandest ports, from Tianjin's massive Binhai-Nu area to Shanghai's extensive Pudong mudflats, down to the sprawling, hyper-engineered maritime boundaries of Shenzhen and Qianhai. These vast economic zones share a massive, hidden common denominator. They sit substantially on artificial landfill. This is reclaimed land, ground that was systematically snatched from the ocean, marshes, and river deltas over the last 40 years through relentless dredging and sand pumping operations. The structural issues striking individual landmarks, like the Boshan Pinnacle or the twisted, half-finished shell of Guangzhou's Longzhou residences, are not isolated engineering flukes. They are high-profile warnings of a much broader, regional challenge. Geotechnical engineers studying these massive reclaimed zones have raised urgent flags about how entire districts built on shifting artificial fill will behave over the coming half-century. And more critically, how they will respond when a major seismic event hits the continental margin. The deeper issue isn't a single flawed blueprint. It is a recurring pattern of building insanely heavy, high-density skyscraper clusters on inherently soft, fluid-filled, or sand-layered reclaimed ground on the flawed assumption that modern engineering can indefinitely compensate for what the geology underneath cannot provide. Sometimes, through sheer brute force spending, it can. The multi-million yuan emergency underpinning program at the Boshan Pinnacle proved that a sinking tower can be partially rescued if you have the hundreds of millions needed to retroactively drill down to the Earth's core. But the economic cost is always astronomical. The structural fix is always partial. And the financial bill invariably lands squarely on the shoulders of ordinary unit owners or municipal taxpayers who had absolutely nothing to do with the original corporate shortcuts. Music drops out completely. A stark, clinical silence envelops the track. So let us close this file by explicitly naming the single, catastrophic decision I promised to reveal at the very beginning of this journey. The lone calculating choice that connects nearly every single leaning, sinking, and structurally compromised tower on this list. It is the fateful executive decision regarding the foundation design. In nearly every engineering disaster we have opened in this dossier, the root of the catastrophe traces back to a high-stakes financial choice made before the tower rose a single floor above the street. The boardroom decision boiled down to a simple choice: whether to invest the massive capital, the heavy machinery, and the crucial months of patience required to drive deep, reinforced pile foundations all the way down into solid, unyielding bedrock, or whether to cut corners, save tens of millions of yuan up front, and gamble that a shallower, cheaper, floating foundation on soft soil, river silt, or sand-layered limestone would somehow have managed to hold the line. Graphic on screen. Comparative constructural summary table tower asset location foundation shortcut. Taken realized upfront savings ultimate structural failure Baoshan pinnacle. Friction piles in river silt, no bedrock, 55 million CNI sunk 406 mm. Lean 710 mm Shenzhen, Chengxi Supreme. Yacht grade silicone versus elastomeric 30 million CNY core fractures, rusted rebar Guangzhou residences. Floating raft grout matrix, no bedrock, 42 million CNY 76 mm active tilt, permanent spinal bend coastal reclaimed zones, 35 towers rafts. In porous limestone silt billions in group development costs active. Ongoing post-settlement. Subsidence the developers behind Baoshan Pinnacle willfully chose to stop short of bedrock. The consortium behind Guangzhou's Longzhou residences skipped the bedrock entirely to save a quick 42 million yuan. Dozens of coastal towers were aggressively anchored into sand-layered formations that were hydrologically guaranteed to keep moving as groundwater shifted with the tides. And in every single scenario, the decision to take the cheaper, faster path was technically deemed defensible on the exact day it was signed off. The paperwork was rubber-stamped by compliant internal engineering panels. The designs were cleared by local housing bureaus eager to meet rapid development quotas. The units were sold to affluent buyers who had absolutely no idea what lay beneath the polished marble floors of their expensive lobbies. The financial savings for the developers were immediate, real, and directly pocketed by executive boards. But the structural costs were equally real. They simply arrived a few years later. They arrived in the form of deep basement cracks, unlivable structural tilts, multi-billion yuan investor lawsuits, frantic midnight evacuations, and luxury ghost towers that may have to be systematically demolished before a single resident ever gets to move back in. The ultimate lesson of this entire investigative file is as simple as it is unyielding. You cannot negotiate with the earth. Sand Q. Heavy slam of a steel file drawer closing. You can delay the financial bill. You can mask structural movement behind a clear silicone coating, a slick corporate press release, or an opaque corporate debt reserve fund. But the ground beneath our feet does not read a developer's glossy marketing brochure. It doesn't care about a luxury brand name, and it couldn't care less what the penthouse unit sold for on the open market. Eventually, every single building on Earth settles its final account with the ground underneath it. The only question that remains for the future of our modern skylines is a chilling one. Who is going to be left standing there when that bill finally comes due? The file on the 5 sinking towers is officially closed. Thank you for standing with the construction files. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and I will see you in the next dossier.